Well, good morning. So today we're going to talk about customer and data analytics. And Dennis started us off with talking about the customer. What I'm going to try to do is talk about how you can use analytics in your organizations to get closer to your customers. Okay? All right, so I have two presentations today, one later on about big data. But today's presentation, the one I'm going to do right now, is really about data analytics. So two things I want you to think about as we go through this presentation. I want you to think about, in your organizations, what problems are you trying to solve? Think about, within your business, what challenges are you having with data? What I'm going to walk you through today is going to be a bit of a framework that you can use, whether you're a startup or whether you're a multinational global corporation. I have a couple of case studies that I'm going to show you on how organizations have used data within their organizations to grow revenue, to increase customer satisfaction, and to get closer and closer to their customer. Because what you're going to hear from us constantly today is about increasing the customer experience. So as you sit through this presentation, I want you to just jot down a couple of questions. Questions around what problems within our organization are we trying to solve? Because when I talk to you about big data and I talk to you about data analytics, I want you to bring it to your own situation. I want you to bring the knowledge to your own organization and say, how can I use what he's telling me to solve the problems within our organization? So, what is data analytics? You're going to hear a lot of definitions of analytics. I like to keep it very simple. I think data analytics is taking information and garnering insights so we can make better decisions. That's really what it's about. At the end of the day, the only reason why we're gathering this data is to make better business decisions. And once you come to that conclusion that the reason why I'm pulling this data together is because I want my business to grow. I want to increase customer satisfaction. I want to make sure that customers continually come back. Then you'll start to say, okay, these are the types of data I need to gather. Because one problem with data analytics is that there's so much data out there. You saw the slides that Dennis showed you about how much data there is out there. How much is too much? Right? That's a question that you'll have to figure out. I heard the question someone asked about startups and how can they get started. My answer to that question is very simple. You have to determine how much data you need to solve the business problem you're trying to solve. I'm going to talk to you about is this slide easy to read? Yeah? Okay. Looks hard to read for me. I'm going to talk to you about three evolutions of data analytics. Descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. Descriptive is probably what you're doing today. It's more about reporting. It's about taking the historical data that you have today within your organizations and doing some type of year-over-year comparison. If you've got sales data, you're looking at last year's sales versus this year's sales. If you've got customer visits, you're looking at how many customers visited last year versus how many customers have visited this year. So that's kind of descriptive analytics, and it's really it's sort of the fundamental basics of data analytics, and it doesn't yet inform you on any decision. Then this is what we did last year. This is what we're doing this year. So it gives you sort of a current state of affairs, if you will. The next step is going to be predictive. And Dennis talked about this too. Predictive is where you start to do some actual digging into the data. Now you're looking at the data that you had last year, and you're looking at this year, and you're saying that, well, I noticed that during the summer, there's about a 5% increase. That's interesting. If I look back 2 years, I see a 4.5% increase. If I look back 3 years, I see a 3.5% increase. So I'm starting to see a trend here. So predictive analytics is your ability to take the data that you have, look at it, and say, I'm going to start forecasting what next year is going to look like based on the data I have today. Prescriptive analytics is taking it a step further. Prescriptive analytics, and I'll walk you through each of these, don't worry. Prescriptive analytics is saying, I know what I did last year. I have a sense of what I'm going to do this year. Now, is there anything I can do to get ahead of that? Is there anything I can do to action what I know or what I think I know is going to happen? That's where prescriptive analytics comes in. All right, let's start with descriptive analytics. So again, I said descriptive analytics is really, if you think about it, if you look at the graph to my right, I have a value versus difficulty, right? How much value am I going to get versus how difficult is it, right? And descriptive starts at the very, very basic. This is pure reporting, right? You have this data today, and now you're just looking at year-over-year comparisons. So pretty straightforward to do. Almost any organization can do it. The first thing you have to do is actually capture the data, which most of us are doing. The challenge that you're going to have, and the challenge that most organizations have, is you may not be capturing the data at the level at which you need it. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of case studies today. I have 3 case studies, specifically from the hospitality industry, because I work in hospitality. I know some of you are from other industries, but what I'd like you to do is take those examples and think through in your own organizations, in your own industries, how can I apply that knowledge? So back to descriptive analytics, right? I gave you an example, looking at past revenue and saying, okay, are there any historical trends that I can identify? Can I look at year over year and expect something different? Or if I see a drop, I can alert myself and say, wow, wait a minute. Last year this time, sales were up, or sales were at this level. They're down about 10 or 15%. Maybe we should look into this. Right, so that's what descriptive analytics allows you to do. Predictive analytics. So if descriptive analytics is the what, right, what happened? Descriptive analytics is the when. When is it going to happen? How am I going to know it's going to happen? Well, because I looked at my year-over-year data, and now I'm doing some type of modeling. I could be doing some type of forecasting. I could be doing some type of algorithm that says, well, if this happened at this time, same time last year, then I expect this to happen as well, right? So I know we were talking last night at dinner, Carnival is a big event here, yes? Okay. So as a hoteler, if you're in the area where Carnival happens, you probably should expect some lift in revenue as a result, I would expect. So predictive analytics allows you to prepare for that and say, you know what? Carnival is when? February? March? February, okay. Everybody here is going to Carnival. So February. So around the February timeframe, I'm going to expect a similar increase in revenue as I did last year, right? That's just what prescriptive analytics allows us to do. Prescriptive analytics allows us to figure out how will it happen. So back to the Carnival example. If I know that I'm going to get a lift in revenue because this festival is happening, then I may decide that I'm going to increase my prices 1 to 2 to 3% because I know, right, based on my occupancy, if my typical occupancy is about 40, 50% and it goes up to about 80% during that time, well, I can increase my prices during that time. That's what prescriptive analytics allows you to do. It allows you to action the information that you have. Now, some people say, well, you know, I've got to worry about my competitors. What if my competitors don't raise their prices and so on and so forth? Well, that's where you bring in all types of data, right? In the hotel industry, we have access to competitor data information. And typically what happens is when you raise your price, even if it's a 1 or 2%, you'll find that the competitors will follow. So prescriptive analytics is going to allow you to say, I'm going to optimize my revenue. I'm going to use that word a couple of times. I'm going to optimize my revenue. The reason why I like the hotel industry is because if you think about it from a revenue perspective, we have a fixed asset, right? It's one room. And I can charge you $50 a room when nothing's going on. And if something else is going on, I can charge you the same room. I can charge you $70 a room. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business person, it's a good business to be in, right? It's a business where you can price one asset differently depending on availability, depending on the data that you've collected. That's what prescriptive analytics allows you to do. It allows you to optimize your revenue. And in prescriptive analytics, we call that foresight. So if you think of descriptive analytics as hindsight, right, what happened? If you think of predictive analytics as when will it happen, right? So now we're being a little bit more proactive, we're using insight, then prescriptive analytics is gonna be foresight. So I'm looking into the future to make some determinations on what I can do. Let's bring it together. So this is what the data analytics evolution looks like, right? If you look at the complexity versus the business value, as you go up through the chain, you have descriptive analytics, sort of the bottom tier, predictive analytics being your middle tier, and then your prescriptive analytics being the top tier. Now, most organizations are still in the bottom tier, and I'll walk you through a couple of case studies, and you'll see where organizations are, and it's okay to be in the bottom tier. It really is. But what you have to do is, hey, you have to strive. How am I going to go from just being descriptive to now starting to predict, to now being more prescriptive about how I handle the analytics that I have? When you're in the descriptive mode, right, it's really about reporting. It's really about doing analysis. You're monitoring to some degree, right? And then once you move into predictive, now you start to see more business value. Now you can actually make better business decisions. So you might say, wow, Emmanuel, this is all great, right? Where do we sign up? It's not easy, right? There's lots of challenges with data. There's lots of challenges with data. The first challenge with data is not all data is created equal. What do I mean by that? Well, Dennis showed us the gobs. I call it gobs. I don't know how you translate that in Spanish. Gobs, lots. Lots of data. Dennis showed us that there's lots of data available to you. But not all data is created equal. What you have to do is look at your business and say, what are the data sets that I need? If customer is key to you, if the guest is key to you, then what are the data sets that I need about my customer in order to bring value to my business? You need a data management process in place. I'll tell you a story. When I first joined Wyndham, I joined after they had started 2 data initiatives prior to me coming on board. We'd spent millions and millions of dollars, and we had to end up writing off some of those costs because we didn't have the proper data management in place. So the worst thing you can do is leave this conference and say, I'm going to start right away. I'm just going to jump in and dive in. You got to have a plan. You need to have some type of data management process in place. I can't stress how important that is. What I find is that most organizations tend to spend 80% of their time taking the data and manipulating it, moving it around. And now they only have 20% of the time to actually do analytics. And if you think about that, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? The purpose is to get the analytics so you can make better business decisions. If I've just spent 80% of my time manipulating the data, then I'm only spending 20% of the time on what really matters the most. A colleague of mine, former colleague of mine, she now runs revenue management for MGM Hotels. She wrote a book on data analytics, and she has a theory that says that organizations need to move from this 80-20 model to what she calls the 20-30-50 model. And her premise is this: spend 20% of your time trying to prepare for the problem you're trying to solve. Spend 50% of your time, 20, 50, 30, 50% of your time actually solving the problem. That's the data analytics. And now you've got 30% of the time left. Well, what do you do with that? Now you can actually start to explore the data that you have and innovate. One of the biggest draws of big data is that once you start to collect all these data sets about your customer, now you start to identify things that you didn't know before. Let's say you're collecting data about me. You know that Emmanuel comes in, he likes his room a certain way. He likes cold water in the fridge. He doesn't like to be bothered in the mornings by room service. The more you know about your customer, the easier you make it for them to come back. Does that make sense? Right? So that's really the point you want to get to. And then last but not least, how do you handle these large sets of data? I'm going to talk to you about structured and unstructured data. What does that mean? I'll talk to you about how to distinguish between the two, how to handle the two. How do you handle large sets of data? One more thing on the last slide, actually. I'll talk to it. The good news is all of the data challenges that I presented, they're really opportunities. That's why if you looked at the graphic I had a picture of a guy, struggling with the challenges, and then a picture of the same guy understanding that there are opportunities. All of the challenges that you have with data can become opportunities if you structure your data correctly. So, data management. Having data is just the first step. So once you go down this path and you say, you know what, we want to become smarter about our data, we want to start making better business decisions, having the data is just the first step. Now what you need to do is make sure that it's usable. You need to make sure that the data actually is accurate. The data makes sense for the business cases that you're trying to solve for. And there's 4 main pillars I'm going to talk to you about as it relates to data management. The first one's data governance. What does data governance mean? Data governance is the process of ensuring that the data that you allow people to collect, store, and share is governed somehow. Well, why is that important? It's important because if I don't govern how my data is shared, what could happen, and has happened, is that people take the same set of data and they come up with very, very different insights. I'll give you a really good example. In the hotel industry, we have this concept called RevPAR. Those of you that are in hotels, you probably know it. It's the revenue per average rate of room. And what you do is you take your daily rate, your average daily rate of the room. So if the room costs on average about $50 a night, you take that number and you multiply it by the occupancy rate. And that gives you what you call RevPAR. Very, very important for our business. Now, if I don't govern how that calculation is made, I could have people that take the same set of data and come up with different RevPAR calculations. That's dangerous. Would you agree? Somewhat dangerous. So you have to have data governance. After data governance, you have to have what I call data integration. And data integration is important because you're taking data from different sources. How do you integrate this together? How do you make sure that the data that you integrate actually makes sense? The next one is going to be data quality. So for data quality, this is actually the one that people overlook the most. And data quality is to make sure that your data is consistent, it's accurate, and it actually provides value to your business. And then the last but not least is data storage. I need to make sure that the data that I'm actually storing makes sense for the business cases that I'm trying to solve for. Data governance. So data governance is one of the concepts that's been in the industry for quite a while. It gets the reputation of being very heavy. When people hear the word governance, they start to think of, rules and restrictions, and you're stopping me from getting the analytics that I need. You're stopping me from getting the insights that I need. But governance doesn't have to be that way. What I always tell people when I talk about data governance is, what questions are you trying to answer with the data that you have? That's the first step. Understand the questions that you're trying to answer. Do you want to understand the customer, how much this customer means to you? Okay. Then now I know what types of data I need to do that. Do you want to understand what the lifetime value of this customer could be? Okay, that's a different set of data that I need to capture. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what questions are you trying to answer. The next thing I always tell people is separate the management of the data from the management of the application. And typically, in organizations, that means, sort of separating the IT function from the business function. And, I'm in technology, so to me that makes sense, makes a lot of sense. But a lot of times what I find is that people tend to have the application folks try to manage data as well. And that's when we run into problems. And then last but not least, clarify accountability. Make sure that you clarify accountability. Often we call these people data stewards, people that are responsible for different sets of data. With data integration, I'm really talking about establishing a centralized place where I'm going to store my data. In most cases, it's going to be some type of data warehouse. With new technologies like what Dennis told us about in the cloud, it can be something as simple as a data repository, just one place where all the data comes to. You have to establish, where does your data go? You need to understand, well, what is this data going to be used for? What am I planning to use this data for? And what type of data am I going to store? Am I ready for unstructured data? And I'll tell you what unstructured data means in a minute. And if I am, then instead of a data warehouse, then I'll be looking at what's called a data lake. And then data quality. So this is the one that most people overlook. And I told you before, if you take nothing away from this, the quality of your data matters. Because if you're going to use this data to make business decisions, then it has to be accurate, right? It has to be accurate. Under data quality, there's a couple of things that you need to understand. There's this concept of data profiling. What does that mean? Well, when the data comes in, I need to make sure that I keep it the same. For instance, if I'm collecting data about dates, well, am I going to store it as the full November or just NOV or the number 11? How am I storing the data? Be consistent. Because if you're not consistent, what tends to happen is you start to miss data, right? Because it doesn't match up. So make sure your data is consistent. And that's a function of data quality. The next one is going to be data cleansing. What do I mean by data cleansing? Data cleansing means I'm going to take my data and I'm going to run it through some type of system that says, I want to pull out commas. I want to pull out data that doesn't make sense. In the hotel industry, we have a lot of people who sign up as John Smith or John Doe. Now, maybe there is a John Doe out there, but there's not 100 million John Does, right? So when I see that type of data, I know it's not factual. The other thing people do is they use fake email addresses. You want to pull that out of your clean data sets, right? That's what data cleansing does for you. And then data standardization and parsing. What I'm doing here is, well, if my name is Kimberly and I sign Kim, I need to know that Kimberly and Kim are the same person. If my name is, what's a good name? Thomas, and I put Tom. Well, how do I know that Thomas and Tom are the same person? Chances are, if Tom lives in Bolivia on this street, and Thomas lives in Bolivia on this same street, they might be the same person. Now, if they've got the same email address, they probably are the same person, right? That goes to our data match and merge. So now I'm taking different sets of data and merging it into one. Well, why is that important? Because if I don't do that, I think I have two people when there's really just one. Does that make sense? And so if you look to the diagram on your right, this is an architecture that I use to do my data quality. And I'll walk you through this. This is specific to hospitality again. On the first item here is the data sources. So in hospitality, we think of three main sources of data. There's the reservation data, meaning you came in and you went online and you reserved the property. There's the stay data, which is you stayed at the hotel, I checked you in, and then I checked you out. That's the stay data. And then I have vendor feeds. These vendors could be my contact center, my loyalty provider, Smith Travel, which is an external vendor that gives us data about comp sets. So I take all these data sources and I put them into some type of staging environment. And basically here what I'm doing is I'm staging the data. I'm putting it in a place where I can now start to apply my data quality against it. I don't move this directly into my data warehouse. I've got to apply my data quality against it. Once I do my data cleansing and profiling, then I move it further down into my ecosystem. Data storage. So this is where the conversation about structured and unstructured data happens. This lemonade is really good. They don't make it like that in the US. So structured data, if you think about structured data, this is data that I can that has relationships. I can take the data and I can easily put it into a column or a row. Those of you that are familiar with Excel as a tool, thank you. Those of you that are familiar with Excel as a tool, this is data that can easily fit into Excel. I can take your name, your address, maybe sales data, right? That's structured, has structure to it. There's relationships between it. But then there's data that may be unstructured, meaning I stayed at a hotel and I wrote a TripAdvisor review about you. Well, how do I put that data into some type of structure? So that's the data we call unstructured data. And most of the social media data that Dennis showed you is typically unstructured data. It doesn't mean it's not important. It's actually extremely important to us. But the way we handle structured data is going to be different than the way we handle unstructured data. Structured data we've been dealing with for years. We put it in a database, and then we query the database. Unstructured data is a little tricky. And that's where big data comes into place. So if you look at the charts here, I kind of have distinctions between structured and unstructured data. What are the opportunities with data? Have you ever heard this saying, "In God we trust, all others must bring data"? No? Okay, this is what I use all the time. In God we trust, everybody else bring me some data, because the data is what I use to make my decisions. The good news is there's lots of data available. That's the good news. Right? I'm going to show you stats that show you how much data we're expecting in the year 2020. Oh, I have it. In the year 2020, we're expecting 40 zettabytes. Anybody know what a zettabyte is? 10 to the power 12 gigabytes. So let's break that down. For every person on Earth, that's 5,200 gigs of data. When I told my kids this, it still didn't make any sense. I told a lot of people this, still didn't make any sense. So I related it to YouTube videos, because I think everybody can relate to a YouTube video. If you think that the average size of a YouTube video is about 50 megs, then every person on Earth could put 100,000 YouTube videos up. That's how much data we're talking about. I don't know about you. I've got 2 YouTube videos maybe. I don't know if you have 100,000 YouTube videos up. That's how much data we're talking about. So that's the opportunity that's in front of us. There's a lot of data available. And if our focus is going to be customer experience, then we're going to want to try to get as much data about our customer as possible. Again, I relate back to hotels, so everything I speak to talks about my guest, right? So when I think about opportunities with data, I think about 3 things. I think about, how am I going to improve the guest experience? I think about, how am I going to identify new revenue opportunities? And then, how am I going to increase revenue? In your line of business, you're probably thinking about 3 things too. You're thinking about, how do I increase revenue? Yes. You're probably thinking about, how do I decrease expenses? And then you're also thinking, hopefully you're thinking, how do I connect to my customer? How do I make my customers have a better experience? Because I realize that if I can do that, that increases my revenues. Once you make that connection, you realize that there's a lot of opportunity with data. Okay, let me hop into a couple of use cases. The first one I'm going to introduce you to is Red Roof Inn. I realize they don't have a presence here in Bolivia. They're a US-based company. They've got about 350 hotels in about 38 states. So they're not a small company. What these guys realized was that every year, if you think about flight cancellations, specifically in the US, there's about 2 to 3% of flight cancellations in the US. It's a standard number. What they did was they said, most flight cancellations are tied to weather conditions. So they said, They went to publicly accessible data. You can get weather data, right? Publicly accessible. And they said, if we could figure out when the next major storm was coming, then we could predict that majority of the flights are going to get canceled. Well, if we look specifically where we have locations, why don't we send to those customers some type of incentive to book with us before their flight gets canceled or while their flight's getting canceled? Interesting. They did this we had a huge winter in 2014, and this accounted for 10% of their revenue. 10% of the revenue for that year. So they've made this a part of their strategy going forward. They look at weather patterns, and they say, okay, where are we going to have harsh weather conditions? Let's advertise specifically to those customers because we know who the customers are, we know where they live. What we may or may not know is where they're flying to and from, right? That's data that they need to obtain from the airlines. But once they get that, now they can make the correlation and say, I'm going to incent you somehow. I'm going to give you some type of incentive to come and book with us rather than booking with Choice or Wyndham or whoever else. Let's look at Starwood. I don't know if you guys know Starwood. I don't think they have a presence here, okay? I'm seeing heads. So they don't have a presence here. They're owned by Marriott, so Marriott just bought them. Before the purchase, they had about 1,200 hotels globally. They're a big chain. What they did is they said, we're going to do the same thing that the Red Roof Inn was doing, right? They're taking publicly available data in the weather, but we're going to do something different with it. You know, Dennis just told me this morning, it's 21 degrees in New York. 21 degrees, and I'm up here sweating. It's 21 degrees in New York City right now. That's very cold. So what they're doing is they're saying, I'm going to advertise to folks in these where the weather conditions are pretty cold. I'm going to advertise them hotel places in the Caribbean at a discounted rate. I'm going to advertise to them places that are much warmer at a much discounted rate. So, it's a gamble. Some will take it, some won't. But what they're doing is they're using their data to try to figure out, how do I get more customers to book with us? What they've also done a good job of is while you're on site with them, they use your Wi-Fi data to figure out, what are you searching for? While you're staying at a hotel, are you searching for the best places to eat? Are you searching for the best places to catch a movie, the best places to catch a film? They take that data and they also advertise to you pre and post stay, meaning while you're there, before you get there, if they have the data ahead of time, knowing that, the last time you were here, you were looking for these things. Now you're staying at another one of our properties. Well, here's a set of options for you. Pretty interesting. And the last case study I'm going to give you is my own, the company I actually work for. So Wyndham Hotels. I'll give you some background on Wyndham. Wyndham's a global company. You may or may not know Wyndham, but you probably know one of the brands that we own. We own about 20 different brands, and that's the brands in the bottom left corner. We're in about 80 countries, 6 continents. 40% of that is international. So pretty big brand. If you look at the top right, that's how we compare against our comp set. So we're the largest in terms of number of rooms, or number of hotels, sorry. So Hilton, IHG, Marriott, and Choice, right? So we've got about 8,900 hotels. And then if you look at the bottom right, this really tells you the segments in which we compete in. So we mostly compete in what we call the economy scale. So you can't really see it on this, but the dark blue circles are the economy scale. The lighter blue circles are the what we call mid economy scale. And then the others are sort of our luxury brands. So pretty big company. The challenge that we had was we grew very quickly. Every 18 months, maybe they're telling me I'm out of time. Every 18 months, we acquire a brand. Every 18 months, Wyndham acquires a brand. Well, the problem with that is now we have systems that we have to integrate, right? Every time we grab a new company, there's a system we need to integrate. So our challenge was, how do we build a warehouse that's going to support our acquisition strategy, but also allow us to integrate very quickly? And so when I joined Wyndham, one of the things I came up with was, we need to build this next generation warehouse, one that's agnostic of platform, one that doesn't matter, which brand we acquire, so that we can quickly assimilate brands and bring them into our ecosystem, right? So the problem was we had tried this before. Before I got there, I told you they had tried this 2 or 3 times, and it sunk millions and millions of dollars into it. But the challenge was we didn't have a data management strategy in place. So this is our problem statement. So if you look at from 1990 to 2018, every 18 months, we acquire a brand, right? And what we do is we take that data and we stuff it into our legacy systems. So now we have brands, we have 20 brands, but we can't get consistent reporting across all 20 brands. And you would think a company like Wyndham would have access to that. The other problem was the data was not at the right level. What I mean by that was we have data at what we call the assumed stay level. So if you stayed for 5 days, I can't tell how much you paid per day. I just have your total spend. Well, is that important? Yeah, it is. It's important if you want to know day by day how much revenue you're making. We didn't have that data available to us. So here's the approach. The first thing we did, the first thing I'm telling you to do, establish data management. And it wasn't quick. It took about 6 to 8 months. It took time to get the organization to understand the importance. It took time to get people to start to realize why we needed to do this and bring them along. And then after we did that, we were able to move to phase 2. Phase 2 was to build an enterprise data warehouse and start to bring these data sets in a manner that made sense for the business. And then phase 3 was actually building out the analytical layers. So if you remember from the first part of the talk, I talked about the different sets of, the different types of analytics. We then built out the last analytical layer. And this is what the architecture looks like. So it's a bit of an eyesore, but I'll walk you through it. So if you start, again, from left to right, you have your data sources. You take your data sources, you bring them into a staging area. You have to cleanse them. You have to provide some type of data quality against them. From there, you move it to what I call master data management. And then from there, once your data is clean, now I can do analytics against it. What I'm not showing you here is the data lake. So typically, if you get all the way here, this is predictive, right? This is predictive analytics. If you want to get to prescriptive analytics, now you attach a data lake to your analytical data store. And last but not least, you need some way to visualize the data. And this is where your business intelligence tools will come into place.
(80-20) time management as far as data goes. Where would you put the limit between manipulating data and analyzing data?
So I wouldn't put a limit on analyzing data, because the analysis that you're doing is so that you can get more insights. The manipulation, think about it differently. The manipulation that you're doing is so that you can get to the analysis. So if I had zero manipulation to do, then I would spend 100% of my time analyzing. Does that make sense? I wouldn't limit the amount of time I spent analyzing. My point there was that we spend too much time preparing the data, and we don't have any time to actually look at the data to get the insights that we're trying to get. There'll come a point where you max out how much insights you're going to get, and now you start to think, okay, do I need additional data sources to bring in to actually make this data more meaningful?
Well, the question went more towards, isn't manipulating data part of the analysis? Where would you say the difference begins, where you start analyzing while manipulating data?
Okay, so I understand your question now. So if I'm manipulating the data as part of my analysis, that to me is part of the analysis. Does that make sense? So when I think of manipulating data, I think of preparing it for the analysis, right? So putting it in a pivot table, if it's Excel, or starting to look at the columns and the rows. I want that stuff to be very easy. I want that stuff to be at my fingertips. I want to be able to move things around. And you have tools today that will allow you to move things very quickly so you don't have to spend a lot of time doing that. That's really my point.
It's about the costs. How much would the software be? Are they high costs to install all this architecture that you talked about?
So that's a really good question. How much does it cost to install the stuff that I talked about? So if you remember from Dennis's presentation, he talked about the cloud. The beauty of the cloud, and I used to work for Amazon, so I'm very biased towards Amazon. But the beauty of Amazon's cloud is that they charge you per minute. So you can start very small. If you want to see how it goes, you can start with very small data sets, and then you can grow over time. So you don't need to have a lot of money to actually start doing some of this analysis. The architecture that I showed you is pretty robust, but it can scale up or it can scale down if you build it in the cloud. If you don't build it in the cloud, then you do have some capital costs that you'll need to account for up front. You'll need to figure out how much data do I need, so on and so forth. That's why I think the cloud's a better option if you just want to get your feet wet, if you just want to try it out. If you're a small business and you want to say, I understand some of my data needs, but maybe not all. Let me try this. Let me experiment with it. The cloud's a great option for that.
What type of data do you think we need to use in order to generate the strategies to create a type of hotel for the gay community in Bolivia?
For the what?
Gay community.
The gay community. So I don't think that your strategy needs to be different for the gay community than it would be for any other community. I would assume that you just look at the gay community as a customer. And what you need to understand is, what data do I need to understand about this customer? Right? So I wouldn't create a separate strategy for a black person or a white person or a gay person. I don't think it matters. I think what matters is the type of data that you collect. And so I guess maybe the only place where it does matter is if there are certain preferences that maybe a gay person has that other, okay. Slippery slope.
Okay, we have another question.
Okay.
What's the strategy that you suggest in order to compete with businesses like Airbnb that have no traditional models in the hotel business?
So in our business, we're competing with Airbnb. And what we find is that Airbnb is very, very good at connecting with their customer. If you go to Airbnb right now, they don't talk about rooms. I was just talking about this at dinner. They don't talk about rooms or places. They talk about experiences. What type of experience do you want to have? Well, that's great for a person who is visiting a new country and doesn't know much about the country. If I want to have an experience in Bolivia and I go to Airbnb, it will take me to the different types of experiences I can have in Bolivia. That's amazing. So if we want to compete with the Airbnbs, we need to get closer to our customers. We need to understand the customer better. There's no other way to compete with those guys other than to get better at knowing your customer.